Could a Matthew Judon reunion for the Baltimore Ravens make sense for both sides? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. As always, thank you so much for being here with us and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes over in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your shows. So be sure to subscribe to us. Audio form, video form. It's the same show, so you're not missing out on any content either way. We bring you Ravens news, analysis, updates 5 days per week, plus more. We do bonus episodes, live editions after big news and Ravens games. So we got a lot of Ravens content coming your way as always. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. A midweek edition of the show, and I'm excited for this one. We have a first-time guest on the show, someone who I've wanted to have on for a really long time, so I appreciate him taking the time to hop on with me of 105.7. He's the co-host of Inside Access, Baltimore Football Daily, Ravens pregame, is very in tune with the Baltimore sports scene. It is Tim Barbalace. Tim, thank you for hopping on. How has this offseason been for you?
Well, geez, it's been a whirlwind. And I think that's what makes how the last season ended such, so bitter, where this was kind of expected. I mean, I know that this seemed a little jarring for a lot of fans, but just considering the fact that they had over 20 unrestricted free agents and Eric DeCosta talking at the Justin Madubuike contract press conference, saying that they can't sign everybody. And the voidable years that they did last year, some of those kicked in, and it makes things more difficult. And you look at the coaches that have left and Joe Ortiz and some analytic guys. So this was always going to be an off season of change for me. So I can't say that I'm surprised by anything. I think if there was one move that I wish was made, it would have been Ronald Darby. I felt like he got a pretty fair 2-year deal with the Jags, not a ton of money. I thought he was really, really underrated for the Ravens last year, considering all the games that Marlon Humphrey missed. But besides that, man, it hasn't been shocking to me. It hasn't been a huge surprise.
Yeah, I think people were expecting a lot of losses when it came to Baltimore. Just the sheer amount of talent and the numbers they had in their free agency pool. It's funny you mentioned Darby, though, because I've kind of talked about which free agency losses stung the most. Some people say Patrick Queen, maybe Geno Stone. I think maybe that gets lessened by where they went for some people. But I say Ronald Darby. He played really well for them, stepped up for Marlon Humphrey when they needed him to. And they did get back Arthur Millette. Their nickel room right now actually looks pretty good with Millette and Pepe Williams and Ardarius Washington. But I think they do need, Darby felt like that perfect third corner. And now they're going to have to go out there and find another guy. So that to me is the one that stings right now. But we'll talk in the second segment, Tim, about one that could sting even more if he has a healthy season. There was some updates on J.K. Dobbins. So be sure to stay tuned for that in the second part of the show. But I wanted to talk a bit about, and again, we've been talking about this for a while. I feel like it's the thing people are talking about in Baltimore right now. It's the edge position. Jadeveon Clowney goes to Carolina, a 2-year, $20 million deal that's worth up to $24 million. And as I've been saying, Baltimore was never really going to be in at that price. It just feels like that's too rich for what they're working with right now. You mentioned, I don't want to say they went all in last offseason, but they made it. They set themselves up to compete. And I think that's why you mentioned where they don't win the Super Bowl last year, and it kind of feels like an even bigger punch because it just all felt like it was there. They made the moves, they set it up, and then obviously it resulted in that failure in the AFC Championship. But now it's about rebuilding, and in the edge room, after losing Clowney, Kava and Noy's still out there, but you have a lot of inexperience. It's Adafe Owe, it's David Ojabo, it's Tavius Robinson, it's Malik Ham. Now, Matthew Judon's been a name that's popped up. There haven't been any official rumors, but just to talk about the possibility, April Fool's was 2 days ago, where this episode's coming out on April 3rd. We're recording on April 2nd, so technically yesterday. And the Patriots did a couple of April Fool's related things with Matthew Judon. They ended up tweeting out a goodbye to him with the crying emoji and everything. And then Nelson Aguilar actually got in on it. He tweeted, or I think it was an Instagram story, actually. He put an Instagram story out of Judon in a Charm City sweatshirt and was like, welcome back. But that was all April Fool's stuff. Obviously, no validity to it. Then you take a step back and you're like, wait a second. This actually makes a little bit of sense. Judon is in the last year of his contract. Tim, I don't really think the Patriots are going anywhere in terms of playoffs anytime soon. Feels like they're definitely in a rebuild. Would you be okay with a potential Matthew Judon reunion, especially if it doesn't cost too much draft capital in the trade?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it all depends on what the Patriots want, of course, but the Ravens, which differs from last year, they got a lot of picks. They have 9 draft picks, so they have, some wiggle room at disposal, and we know that Eric DeCosta likes to wheel and deal, but it's a move that does make a lot of sense, and quite frankly, Kevin, I hadn't really thought about it until you brought it up, and I've always been a huge Matt Judon fan, and I just think that he's such a well-rounded player, and I think the Ravens, they need at least one proven vet, and maybe that's Kyle Van Noy, maybe that's someone else, maybe it's Matt Judon, but we talk about the salary cap situation with the Ravens, and something that Eric DeCosta has yet to do this offseason, and typically it's an organization that's reluctant to do it, is restructure some deals. You can get $11 million from a Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Roquan Smith. Like, you can make those moves to make the money work for a Matt Judon. And Judon's still young enough where, what is he, 30, maybe 31? It looks like, if you gave him another year extension, 2-year extension, if you pulled off that trade and then, you create even more salary cap flexibility from that point. But I think I would be in favor of that move, man. I would love that reunion.
It'd be really good. And I think also the part, and people look at the contract again last year, but his cap hit right now for the Patriots is $14 million. But obviously in trades, the signing bonuses don't go over to the other team. So it would be about a 6.5, 7.5 million cap hit instead of that 14 million. Now, Judon only played in 4 games last year.
Yeah.
Had an injury, but he did have 4 sacks in 4 games. So this is not like he's a washed player who's on the downside of his career. You mentioned he's 31 right now. I think he'll turn 32 right as the season starts, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm with you where you get him in a deal, you extend him for 1 or 2 years, and you have a veteran pass rusher who is familiar with the organization. And it leaves you a little less worried for what's there right now, especially if Kyle Van Noy doesn't end up coming back.
For sure. And look, man, we're only a year removed from the fact that when he had 15.5 sacks, and it was back-to-back double-digit sacks for Matt Judon. Like, he was a serious player for some mediocre Patriots teams. And I just think it makes a lot of sense to do it. And for the $6.5 million base salary, like, that's a steal for a pass rusher and really a well-rounded player like a Matt Judon. And like you said, one of those moves, whether, it's Judon, Van Noy, another edge guy, it takes so much pressure off of a David Ojabo. And look, Odafe Owe, he is a very, at worst, a very, very, very solid player. Is he going to be like a double-digit sack guy that I was predicting? I'm not so sure. But having him and then a vet opposite of him, and then you can kind of work back in a Ojabo and maybe a draft pick. Tavius Robinson got a decent amount of run as a rookie. I think then you start to feel a lot better about the room.
Yeah, the more we talk about it, Tim, the more I just love the idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I know a lot of people were kind of in on maybe a Hassan Reddick deal for the Ravens, but then you obviously have to worry about, okay, what's he going to want contractually? That's going to be a massive number. And if the Ravens weren't in on $10 million per year with Clowney, I don't know if they're going to be very willing to go to 18, 20 per year on Reddick, but this makes a lot of sense where I don't want to call it a transitional piece because I still think Judon has multiple years of really, really, really good football. But this is a guy who his last 4 healthy seasons, 4 straight Pro Bowls. You mentioned those. He came to New England and just immediately just balled out. To me, that is where it's an advantage because we talked about it last year too a little bit. I think everybody was where before they signed Clowney and Van Noy, it was okay. Well, who was going to take that pressure off of the young guys? And we saw like now the best case scenario happened for the Ravens where not only was the pressure taken off, but the vets just balled out. So you're hoping it's kind of the same thing there too.
Sure. And that's the funny thing, and we've been talking about on Inside Access BFD, just we were literally having the same conversation a year ago. They ended up leading the league in sacks, but I think something where I think fans maybe need to temper expectations a little bit. I mean, Eric DeCosta batted 1,000 on those vet pickups. I mean, you think of guys that were on the market as late as they were, going back to a Darby, going back to a Millette, and then, of course, Clowney and Van Noy a couple weeks into the season. I mean, all of those guys for not a lot of, probably under $10 million combined, provided significant impact. I mean, 18 and a half sacks out of those 2 veteran pass rushers. I can guarantee you Eric DeCosta wasn't planning on 18 and a half sacks out of both of them, but that's what they got.
I can't even believe that we're having the conversation about that because there were so many questions about what does Clowney have to offer still in his career? What does Van Noy have to offer still? And they go out there in this Mike McDonald system, which again, even though McDonald left, they're still going to keep the system with the internal hire with Zach Orr while he adds his touches to it. But the Ravens, I think Judon actually might be a better fit for this new system than he was in Don Martindale's. I don't think Don Martindale's system was very sack-friendly, edge-friendly. So I'd be really interested to see how it works. Plus, I think a lot of people miss that Judon Marlon Humphrey bromance with the cheese noodles and everything. So hey, you know what? That's a little added bonus there that I would love to see back there. But coming up with the second part of the show, we're gonna wrap up this conversation about the edge room. Also get into some free agency updates about J.K. Dobbins, the Los Angeles Chargers becoming the Los Angeles Ravens even more so, and a lot more. Stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by Gametime. There have been plenty of frustrating ticket buying experiences in my life. And look, for the Orioles and the MLB, it's sometimes been a little bit of a struggle just because sometimes I wasn't sure if the seats were good. Sometimes I couldn't find last-minute tickets. Sometimes there are just no good deals at all. But Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. The prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, use some receipt, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Now, the Orioles, they've had 2 series so far. Well, they're wrapping up the second one here soon with the Kansas City Royals. But the opening day series was awesome against the Los Angeles Angels. They go 2-1 on that trip. Plus, for me, I'm looking forward to going to a lot of games, specifically in June. That's a really tough June stretch for the Orioles. A lot of good teams coming to Baltimore, so I'm looking for that over on Gametime. Plus, the Gametime app has a lot of amazing features, such as flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views. There are so many different things. Plus, it's easy to find in my MLB tickets and any other kind of event in your area as well. Plus, with their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and more, Gametime has you covered. Take the guess we're going to buy tickets with Gametime. Down the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spell it LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guarantee. We're back, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with Tim Barbalace of 105.7 The Fan. These past couple of days, I've been reserving the first part of the second part of the show to give a little health update. Everybody who listens knows, and I told you before we came on here, been a little bit of a struggle for me over these last 4 days. Had a 101.4 fever, 102.7 fever, went down to 107 today. So we're now moving in the right direction, which is it was a struggle to talk for the first few days. We're powering through though, and that's why I appreciate Tim hopping on. It's been a lot, but hopefully we'll be back in the 90s tomorrow, high 90s, so that'll be good for me. But let's wrap up the edge conversation, Tim. We talked a lot about Judon, the potential what ifs, but let's talk about who's in the room right now, because it is Owe, it's Ajabo, it's Robinson, it's Ham. Without any other potential addition being factored in for agency or draft, what's your confidence level in the room right now, and how are you feeling about guys like Odafe Owe and David Ajabo?
There's just so much unknown, and I think that's the tough thing. Where, look, Owe, I'm feeling good about. I think Odafe Owe is very much a starter caliber, edge player. I truly believe that. And like I said in the first segment, is he a guy that's going to get double-digit sacks year in and year out? I'm not so sure, but I know he's a damn solid, good player. But with Ajabo, it's tough, man. The first 2 years have pretty much just been a wash. And John Harbaugh's saying all the right things, stuff that you would expect in terms of David Ajabo breakout. And I just don't know if I'm Eric DeCosta, if I can bank on that. I just, given what unfortunately has happened, it's not his fault, blowing out his Achilles on the pro day and then, last year with the ACL. But I would love to just see David Ajabo have a healthy 2024 campaign, and that way we can just learn more about him. And I was out there a few days during training camp, and of course everyone watched the preseason games. And I think, with Ajabo, you saw him struggle to set the edge, which is a little concerning. But, he was someone that Chuck Smith was super, super high on. And we found it very interesting, hearing Chuck Smith talk about Odafe Owe and then hearing him talk about David Ajabo during OTAs. And it almost sounded like Ajabo was the older player talking about more refined moves. And with Owe, it was, you're going to learn his move by the end of the year. I think, look, those two players have potential, but I think that's the key word, right? And obviously, Owe is the more known commodity. If I was Eric DeCosta, I'd have to add at least one more vet and then maybe someone in the draft.
Yeah, I'm with you, where potential is awesome, right? We see so many players every single season reach their potential, but you can't put all the eggs in the potential basket, where there does have to be a balance. And that's why personally, I liked the Ravens edge room so much last season, because you had the veterans who had been there. And sure, there were some questions about how would they contribute, but you at least knew what they had and they could at least do something. Like Clowney, we knew that he was one of the better run edge defenders in the NFL. Now, of course, I don't think a lot of people expected the pass rush production that they got out of him, but with Van Noy too was versatility and all that type of stuff. And then he balls out too. Then you have the young guys with Owe and Ajabo. And unfortunately, again, Ajabo doesn't finish the year out, but that to me, it's the perfect balance. So I'm with you, Tim, where you got to add at least one veteran guy. Now, I know the list of free agents outside of Kyle Van Noy isn't that inspiring. Kyle Van Noy is kind of at the top of that list, and then everybody else is kind of below. But hey, you know what? We were saying that last offseason. Didn't really know what Clowney and Van Noy had to offer. Maybe a Bud Dupree or someone like that comes in and just surprises everybody.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned a Bud Dupree. That's kind of, when we've done these exercises, just – if not Kyle Van Noy, who's someone else? And I actually did bring up Bud Dupree. Had 5.5 sacks last year. Of course, we know he's familiar in the AFC North. Maybe that's someone you can catch a little bit of a lightning in a bottle, like you did with Van Noy and Clowney, if Van Noy doesn't end up coming back.
Yeah, I mean, there are options. I know that for a lot of people right now, it is Kyle Van Noy or bust in terms of free agents, but there are other avenues, especially in terms of a trade like we were talking about there. But I'm very interested to talk about this next thing here, Tim, because we've obviously seen the Ravens lose a lot of free agents over the last 3 weeks. It has not really been even just like a slow burn either. It feels like every other day we're hearing about another Raven that goes somewhere else. Now, for J.K. Dobbins, he has not signed anywhere yet, but there was some movement on him in terms of where he could potentially go. And we figured out yesterday that he was on a visit with the Kansas City Chiefs. But just a couple hours later, the Chiefs re-signed Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then the reports are now, well, maybe Dobbins and the Chiefs could reunite, and that could be a partnership in the offseason. Now, he's also visited the Chargers. The Cowboys right now, I don't think, have a running back, so that's another option for Dobbins. But it's so interesting because you also, the Chiefs, they're not a division rival to the Ravens, but obviously the Mahomes and Lamar matchups have had some definite juice. But then you look at the other guys like Tyler Huntley going to Cleveland, Geno Stone going to Cincinnati, and then Patrick Queen. Even you want to throw Deshaun Elliott's name in there, you can. Them both going to Pittsburgh. Is there just something in the air with all these guys going to rivals, or what do you make of all this?
It is really interesting, right? Because we really haven't seen a whole lot of this in recent years, and with the Queen one specifically. That was something when it initially happened, and it was, a decent surprise. I think we were on air at the time when it happened. And the first thought that came to my head was, I think Queen is the first guy in the history of the rivalry in the prime of their career, switch sides. We've seen some names, the Rod Woodsons of the world, but in the prime of their career, switch sides. And that's what's very interesting. And Geno Stone, they going to Cincinnati, like you said, it makes the rivalry, it gives a little bit more juice to the rivalry. I mean, I think that'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, it's definitely unfortunate because it's that double whammy where, you lose the player and then your division rival benefits. So I think that's where it's the extra sting.
Yeah, and even when you're talking about, it's so interesting because even recently we haven't really we've seen some movement, like Alejandro Villanueva goes from Pittsburgh to Baltimore, and Arthur Millette goes from Pittsburgh to Baltimore. Miles Boykin goes from Baltimore to Pittsburgh, but those aren't like the level or quality of player that Patrick Queen is, and obviously for the money as well. I mean, 3 years, $41 million, and obviously I think what adds even more spice to that is the villain comments and how he's kind of approached everything. So that first Derrick Henry and Patrick Queen meeting in the middle of the field, I've been saying it. It's gonna move mountains. I'm putting my money on Derrick Henry there personally, but we're gonna see how it unfolds. I'm really interested for that one too. But then also with the Chargers, Tim, this is another one where we've seen a lot of movement from them, specifically with some former Ravens, where we see Gus Edwards go, we see Hayden Hurst go, Bradley Bozeman. Now we got another one yesterday, and that is Ben Mason. And if you're from the outside looking in, you're like, okay, why is this all happening? Well, Jim Harbaugh is now the head coach over there, obviously John's brother. And then you have Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator. And they actually built, do they have Mark Trestman over there now?
I think they do. I think I remember saying it's some advisory role.
They have built up this Ravens, this Ravens home base of what they're doing over there. So we talked for years, Tim, when Joe Douglas went to the Jets, it was all about the New York Ravens, and then Don Martindale went to the Giants, and that was another iteration of the New York Ravens. What does this say to you and those iterations as well about just how the Ravens have almost set a standard organizationally for teams looking from the outside in?
Well, look, I think we've been seeing this for forever. I mean, at this point, even predating Eric DeCosta. And, when Eric DeCosta was introduced as the next general manager, one of his big goals was retaining their own. And we've seen countless free agents leave Baltimore and sign big-time deals elsewhere. Now, of course, not all of those guys with the Chargers are making big money, but we've seen this and success, the copycat league, and quite frankly, it's surprising that Joe Ortiz stayed here for as long as he did and didn't get this opportunity sooner. But, Mike McDonald, I mean, he was a hot, young coach that was a hot commodity. And Anthony Weaver and Denard Wilson and very, very, very rarely do you ever hear a coach or a player leave Baltimore and speak poorly about their time. I mean, everyone's always talking it up, no matter what the circumstances are. I know yesterday, Cordell Woodland, he interviewed Morgan Moses talking about getting traded. And, he seemed blindsided, like he was saying, but he talked so highly of his time in Baltimore.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's very rare that we hear of negative things from players or anybody leaving the organization. And I think that's what's given it such an incredible rep and where guys will go. And if, maybe a player is talking to one of their NFL buddies and they're like, hey, I'm looking for a new place. Someone recommends Baltimore. And then that's kind of how it goes sometimes. So for Baltimore, they have set somewhat of a standard here in terms of, it's a place for veterans maybe on their second to last contract, or if you want a place to go, family friendly and revitalize your career. We've seen a lot of options like that for players. We're kind of over the final part of the show. We're talking a bit about Baltimore's offseason so far, giving out some early free agency grades as it stands right now. Stay tuned. We got a ton to talk about on the show. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Sports calendar's loaded, and FanDuel's making it even more exciting to get in on the action because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any money found on the bet. That's $200 you can use to bet the tourney, MLB, NBA, NHL, and so much more. The tournament for me, if you've been following along with me here on Locked On Ravens, I got Connecticut winning the whole thing, but all the rest of my Final Four teams are out, so hasn't been a very magical March for me here. It's been a little rough, but you know what? Hey, if Connecticut wins, I guess I'll take a little solace in it. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet a big win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We are back here, Locked On Ravens. I am Kevin Ostreicher. He is Tim Barbalace. We are still talking Baltimore Ravens football on this Wednesday. Tim, everybody was and this is how it goes every offseason, right? The Ravens don't take the approach of spending $100 million on the first day of free agency, but that's where all the action happens. I mean, everybody's getting their checkbooks out. They're writing those contracts, but the Ravens just kind of like to sit back and let things play out for a little bit. Now, the second day of free agency, Baltimore, gave fans something to be excited about. Derrick Henry comes to Baltimore on that 2-year, $16 million deal. How did you like that deal? Are you on board with Derrick Henry? And how do you feel about paying running backs in general, considering Baltimore just hands out a pretty hefty contract?
So I'll say this. I am very anti using a first-round pick on a running back. I will say I'm not too huge on paying a running back in general. I think there was so much smoke with Derrick Henry, even going back to the trade deadline. And for them to get him, it's essentially a 1-year, $9 million deal is what so it's not like they gave him long-term guarantees. It's a 2-year contract in general, but essentially a 1-year deal. And I think if I'm Eric DeCosta, I made that move, and we all know the story. He's 30 years old. He's had 1 billion touches, all of that. I get it. But if I'm Eric DeCosta, I'm saying, can I get one more Derrick Henry-esque year? I'm not saying the guy, from a few years ago but can I get one more Derrick Henry-esque year? And I think they definitely have a shot. And at that point, I'm fine with the move. I'm cool with the move. Where we know how atrocious Tennessee's offensive line has been over the past couple of years. And don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of work to be done in terms of the Ravens' offensive line. But, the fact that you got a Pat Ricard, the fact that you have a Lamar Jackson, and I'm just going to be so interested in seeing how much Todd Monken's offense changes for Derrick Henry, who's more used to, just under center action, where his shotgun carries have been, there's been an uptick there over the past few years, but how much are they going to somewhat meet in the middle there? And it was a small sample size, but Jonas Schaefer covers the Ravens for the Baltimore Banner. He put out a great piece just with Derrick Henry's usage. And smaller sample size, but when, I want to say 70, 80 carries with Malik Willis as quarterback, he was averaging over 6 yards a carry. And obviously Malik Willis is not in the same stratosphere of Lamar Jackson, with all due respect. But, I'm interested in seeing it. I really am interested in seeing it.
Yeah, and I think the thing that intrigues me the most, Tim, is honestly, if they can get everything down and they can kind of figure out the role, which, I mean, it's Derrick Henry. You kind of got to figure out a role for him. He's that good. But what personnel do defenses use with both these guys on the field? Because if you kind of use lighter personnel, speedier personnel to try to stop Lamar getting to the edge or, doing his thing, well, we know Derrick Henry can just bowl those guys over. I mean, he's that physical of a dude. Well, if you go heavy to try to stop Derrick Henry, Lamar can run circles around those guys. So it's going to be interesting to see what personnel they end up using there. But you did mention the offensive line, Tim. You said there's plenty of work to be done. And I'm with you. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
3 starters gone. You mentioned Morgan Moses. Obviously, Kevin Zeitler and John Simpson gone as well. Are you panicking? Are you worried? Are you calm? How do you expect Baltimore to kind of maneuver through this rebuild?
I'm not panicking. If this was a couple weeks into training camp, it might be a different story. But there's still so much offseason left. And we heard John Harbaugh use the word that you just said, Kevin, rebuild in terms of the offensive line at the scouting combine. And I said since jump that they were replacing at least 3/5 of the offensive line. It ended up being that exactly. And it's going to be interesting. I mean, look, it's now or never clearly for Ben Cleveland. And if you're the Ravens, you're hoping, hey, can he be the next Ben Powers? Who it took him till his 4th year to, blossom, and he ended up getting paid by Denver. I mean, if that happened with Ben Cleveland this year, hats off to you, man. That extremely helps this Ravens offense. What's going to be fascinating is going to be a tackle, right? Where we've heard constantly, just with how deep this class is at offensive tackle, at pick 30, do the Ravens go there? And make no mistake about it, Kevin, with Ronnie taking that pay cut and voiding the 2025 year, he's not just playing for his career in ball. Like, he's playing for his NFL career this year.
Yeah.
If he gets hurt, if he, struggles, or you have to do the alternating tackle thing again, I wouldn't be stunned in the slightest if he walked away after this year. So your left tackle of the future is not on your team presently. Now, of course, Stanley's going to play that this year, but beyond, he is not on your team presently. So I think finding that guy in the draft, first round, ideally, but, second, third round, someone that you're hoping in 2025 can be your left tackle. Now, this year, maybe you start him at right tackle and you make that transition, or if Stanley were to go down. And then there's the possibility of, the other guard spot, if it's not filled internally, is that going to be another John Simpson type signing? That veteran that, not making a ton of money and can hold his own. That could be the move there too. But I would not be surprised in the slightest. I've kind of been predicting it for a few weeks now. I think they're going to take 2 offensive linemen in the first 2 days. With how Eric DeCosta has just been talking, about the importance of the offensive line, How many times have we heard the, when Harbaugh was hired in 2008, he's said that line a lot. And I expect him to hit that position group hard early on.
I'm with you. And for Baltimore right now, and I had said this even like in the weeks and months leading up to free agency, There was only one long-term piece on Baltimore's offensive line heading into the offseason, and that was Tyler Linderbaum. It's exactly to your point there, where I think the Stanley restructure and everything, first of all, it helps the Ravens out tremendously.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, him playing on that, I think, what was it, Tim? $26.2 million was the original cap hit. It wasn't feasible for the way. And I've been very vocal on this show about saying I've never seen something before like that rotating tackle thing the Ravens had last year. And I don't think you can win a Super Bowl doing that. I don't think you can.
I don't think you can. And I'd also say this, Kevin, like, I mean, his cap hit last year, give or take, was $23 million, I want to say. That's prohibitive from a cap standpoint. You know, if you're paying a guy that money, he's got to be out there every single snap. So, I mean, that was another reason why they couldn't, run it back with the $26 million.
No. I'm with you 100% on that. And that's why it's so imperative for Baltimore to try to get it right. Now, again, maybe with Ben Cleveland, you get that Ben Powers year. Powers balls out, goes to Denver, gets a big money contract, and maybe that's how it goes. Powers was and it's almost like a similar story where everybody was super excited about Powers, never really got a chance, just struggled a little bit at times, but then comes in contract year, and sometimes contract years. I mean, we literally saw it with like 7 different Ravens this year. The contract year is the magic that you need there. But Tim, let's round this up by giving out some grades here. How the offseason has gone for the Ravens. I think a lot of people are, I guess, a little underwhelmed by the lack of free agency signings the Ravens have made outside of Derrick Henry. I think couple that with they're now at 10 plus free agents lost. It's kind of made for a little panic within the fan base. But how have you personally think the offseason has gone, and what grade would you give them?
I hate to give that non-answer. I'll eventually give one, but I almost feel like it's not fair to grade it right now.
I hear you.
It's very look, man, even the most diehard Ravens fan out there, it's not like you could say, oh man, this is an A offseason. You can't, just given all the losses. But the other flip side of it, the doomsday Ravens fans on Twitter, I can't give it an F right now. I can't, I'm curious how this draft is going to go. And that's something that I've been saying as well, Kevin, is look, you look at the draft last year, and Zay Flowers was awesome. And outside of that, you got some contributions from Tavius Robinson in a rotation role. But really, Zay was the only guy that contributed. And I'm not saying that, to knock the draft class. I'm super pumped to see Trent Simpson this year and the other guys develop. But I think you're going to need multiple guys from this year's draft class to play impact roles for this team this year, given the mass exodus, given the fact that they weren't going to spend a ton of money, and they never wheel and deal during free agency anyways. So I'll say this in terms of a grade, B minus, and it's hard for me to say something, but here's something I will say. Defensively, we saw a lot of guys leave, particularly on that side of the football. By them inking Justin Madubuike to a contract extension, at a minimum, the next 3 years, you have Madubuike, you have Roquan Smith, and you have Kyle Hamilton. And I would put that spine of the defense up against anyone. And that's a hell of a place to start for Zach Orr. It's a hell of a place to start for Eric DeCosta. But, I mean, like I said, Kevin, I almost feel like it's not fair to grade him just this yet. I do want to see, the draft. And I do want to see, look, Eric DeCosta, say it again, batted 1,000 last year with those later end of the offseason type moves. Now, again, I don't think it's fair to expect that this year, but there's going to be one of those guys that they bring in late that plays a role.
Yeah, they're not done yet, and it's crazy to think, Tim, we're only just over 3 weeks into free agency. It feels like it's been like 6 months.
I
Like,
know. I know.
it feels like it's been forever. So I'll go like B minus C plus. Like, I don't hate the offseason so far. Sure, would I wish there would be more signings right now? Yeah, but you got to remember that, again, we're nowhere close. And the Ravens literally signed Kyle Van Noy 3 weeks into the season last year. So this is not the final product. And look, I mean, it is fair to say the Ravens roster right now is worse than it was last year, just because they've lost so many guys. They have holes to fill.
Absolutely.
But in my opinion, look, they still have time. I think once the draft ends, we'll have a better idea. But the Ravens also like to make some moves directly after the draft and a month after that. So still definitely some work to do. Tim, I appreciate you hopping on. Thanks so much for joining me. Please tell people where they can find you and what you're working on here.
Yeah, for sure. Look, you can follow me on Twitter at Tim Barbalace, Barbalace. I know it's hard to spell. Inside Access 2 to 6, Monday through Friday. My Baltimore Football Daily, it's on hiatus right now with the Orioles underway, which we're all fired up for. And yeah, I mean, there's going to be some other random stuff going on. I hope to do some more fill-ins on BetQL this offseason. I was able to get a decent amount of run with them last year. But yeah, just check me out on Twitter and I'll let you know if anything pops up.
Yeah, Tim is a grinder. He in the Baltimore sports scene. The links to all his work will be in the description down below. Tim, I appreciate you again for hopping on. And I appreciate everybody for listening to this episode of Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up tomorrow, of course, it'll be more Ravens content. So be sure to subscribe, follow along. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.